Well, today is the final Sunday of the church year. It's Christ the King Sunday, as Judy was telling the children. We've arrived here. It's kind of been a long 27-week marathon to get to this place through ordinary time. All of the summer began, Pentecost was in May, and after that we've wound our way down to this day. Next Sunday, of course, is the first Sunday in Advent. And to keep the race analogy there, it's not a marathon, but it's a mad sprint for 4 weeks until we end up at Christmas. I don't know about you, but for me, Thanksgiving is kind of a little respite, one day right in the middle of what tends to be a very busy time of the year. A momentary pause that, from my perspective as a pastor, you know, it's not a religious holiday by any stretch of the imagination, and yet it is fraught with the opportunity for the presence of God there. It has more religious meaning for me in many ways than perhaps some of the other big days on our calendar. When the National Day of Thanksgiving was established by Abraham Lincoln on the fourth Thursday of November, it was chosen to be a day of national Thanksgiving for no intentional reason. Or in fact, actually it was chosen because it was arbitrary. There was nothing else on that day for anything except it was just an ordinary day in the life of the world and in the life of our nation. And there are boundless opportunities, aren't there, for us to pause and to stop and thank God for His grace in our lives. Len Sweet says, every Sunday is a feast day for Christians. Every Sunday when we gather to worship, we give thanks for the greatest experience that ever hit planet Earth, the life of Jesus Christ, His teaching, His example, His sacrifice, His resurrection, and the indwelling of God's Spirit. And that makes every time we gather together an expression of thanksgiving. And so every time we eat Sunday dinner, it's a Thanksgiving dinner in a sense. Now, I don't know about you, but I know some of you, like me, grew up in a time when Sunday dinner was kind of a big thing. Our family got together, especially when I was a small child, every Sunday. First we'd go to church, and then we'd go to Grandma's. And Grandma always had a big table and a lot of food, and it was a full house and a lot of expectant stomachs. A Sunday dinner was a meal. It brought wonderful favorites, old favorites, and all kinds of specialties because my Grandma Ford was a great cook. There are a lot of traditions. We had, fried chicken, we had pot roast, or ham, or turkey, or pork roast, or pork chops. Every time we got together to eat a big meal, she always made two kinds of rolls. My sister and I called them little chef's hats. They were bread yeast rolls that were just indescribably wonderful to eat. And she also made sweet, sticky cinnamon pecan rolls that were ooey gooey, and probably about 10,000 calories a piece. And, I always made sure I had at least one of each of those. It's something that sticks in my memory. Going to Grandma Ford's house over in Yates City. And when I stop and think about it, her kitchen was this tiny little thing. No modern conveniences. I mean, she had a gas stove, that was about it, and running water. We would eat until we were uncomfortable. And then you could count on hearing those three little words from Grandma. Room for more? And she'd bring some dessert out, or something like that. She made German chocolate cake from scratch. It was 3 layers high. The recipe has 14 eggs in it. My sister has the recipe. Yeah. It was a killer, literally. We were full. We were beyond full. Well, on Thanksgiving, some of those traditions families carry on. One of the traditions that some families carry on is the empty chair or the empty plate. There's always a setting that's open, an empty chair or an empty plate at the table to remind us that there's room for more. There's room for more. Perhaps there are people who can't be with us that Sunday. Or it comes out of the old Jewish Seder that, the door was left open and the plate was empty at the table because Elijah would come in eventually. Christ would come in and be with the people. Back in 2000, there was a movie released, Pay It Forward. It was a very tender little movie. Helen Hunt, Kevin Spacey. It's about a 12-year-old boy named Trevor, and it was actually based on a true story. This little kid, he's in 7th grade, his social studies teacher said, you can have extra credit if you come up with some positive plan to make a change in the world. This kid really got into this stuff. Now, he was the only child of a single mom who happened to be an alcoholic. So there were a lot of challenges in this kid's life. But in the story, you see that he helps out 3 people who are close to him with some kind of extraordinary gift that they can't take and give for themselves. And then when they say they want to try to pay him back, he says, you can't pay it back, you have to pay it forward. That's the same theme, I think, is, there's always room for more at God's table. There's always room for the opportunity we have to share, to give, to do something good, to do something worthwhile, to do something positive. That's what we're seeing taking place in Frank Donovan's life and in his family's life as he's beginning to learn to trust in God and let God lead him and let God direct the way he uses his resources for godly things. Life is a trust that we receive. The dictionary defines a trust as an arrangement whereby the property legally owned by one person is administered on behalf and the benefit of another person. Some people have trust for their children or their grandchildren so they can get education. Some people have benefited from the trust of frugal ancestors who've cared for them and set up a trust so that you can benefit in your generation. Resources that you have because of the care of someone else. Well, Frank had this intentionally defective trust. I don't really know what that meant, but it was some kind of an intentional instrument to, limit his tax liability. It didn't do anything productive. It didn't help anybody. All it did was get him away from some liabilities that he would have later on. William Howe, who was a great songwriter, wrote For All the Saints. He was an English bishop. He wrote these words. He says, we give thee but thine own, whate'er the gift may be. All that we have is thine alone, a trust, O Lord, from thee. A trust. Now, today we look at the third parable in Matthew 25. Remember, the first one was the bridesmaids, the 10 bridesmaids, 5 wise, 5 foolish. And then the second week we looked at the talents, the 3 men who received a trust from their employer and said, put this money to work. Well, Frank's defective trust was like burying it in the ground. It wasn't doing anything good. Like it or not, though, when we get to the division of the sheep and the goats, it's a parable about judgment. And judgment is a fact of life. Judgment is a fact of life, whether we're talking about the history of nations or personal events in our own living. If we break the law, society judges us because we live in a society of rules and laws. If we live a lifestyle that is constant stress and negative impact on our bodies, then our bodies will judge us because they will break down. We cannot escape judgment. Now, Jesus rarely spoke about the final judgment, but on this one occasion he did, and he paints a picture in this parable. And it gives a strong jolt to those who are hearing him, particularly the religious leaders of his day. They were people who were heavy on doctrine, but pretty short on ethics. They were heavy on the regulations and the rules and the requirements, but they were pretty short on serving, on sharing, and on being the people that God asked them to be. A shepherd divides the sheep from the goats, Jesus says. So too shall there be a division on that final day of God's people. Those on the right will be allowed entrance into the kingdom, while those on the left will be denied. The great surprise is that for those religious authorities of that day, it turns out they were not as good as they thought they were. While on the other hand, those who thought they probably came up short, those who thought perhaps they had failed in life, were the ones who did a better job of sharing God's grace. And I think it sort of posits 3 little truths that we need to lift up today. The best compliment we can pay each to Jesus Christ is, first of all, to follow his teachings. He said, first of all, see and view other people through my eyes. See other people as you see the Christ in them. If we can see what Christ values in another person's life, it makes a difference in how we relate to that person. Secondly, the simple acts of kindness are the most essential. The basics of life, food, shelter, clothing, or we might say life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, perhaps you would say truth and justice in the American way. All of those things we know are essential. And to simply serve in kindness the needs of other people and to care for those people, those are the most important acts that we can make. So simple acts of kindness as we view each other through the eyes of Christ and see the Christ in them. And thirdly, we are judged by the good, which we do not do. Think of that. We are judged by the good to that which we do not do. When we have the resources, when we have the ability, when we have the talents, when we have everything we need at our hands, but do not act when we see a need, we have been judged. We have come up short. When we fail to act and to have the will to do what God has called us to. I know a lot of times we talk about me, and we talk about and we talk about I made this, or I did this, it's my house, these are my kids, this is my car. Before we go too long down that stretch, we need to remember we came into this world with nothing but a cry, a baby's cry. And we will leave this world with nothing but a whimper and a prayer. That's all we carry out of here. The only true measure of success is the ratio between what I might have become and what I have become. Or Teddy Roosevelt said it a different way. He said, do what you can with what you have where you are. Let me say that again. Do what you can with what you have where you are right now. That's what it means to live effectively. You remember Roots, Alex Haley, the author. He tells a story about his father's life and how a simple act of kindness impacted not only his father's life, but the generations in that family to come. Alex's father was the 8th of 8 children living in a sharecropping family down in the South. Everyone in the family needed to help bring in the crops. Usually after several years of schooling, they got the basics educations of reading and writing and a little arithmetic. Then they had to drop out of school and they had to help work on the family farm. That's what sharecroppers did. Everybody was pressed into service to meet the needs of the family. Now, Alex, his father, he said his father had a particular ability in school, and his grandmother recognized that, and so she bargained in a sense and intervened on behalf of her child so he could stay in school. And he was the only one of the 8 children to finish high school. And when he finished high school, then he had an opportunity to go on further to Lane Institute in order to go to college. He had to work 4 part-time jobs just to earn enough money to stay there. And he did that for 3 years. And every summer he would work as a porter on a train that ran north and south through Florida. While he was on that train as a porter one time, he got into a conversation with an elderly gentleman who couldn't sleep during the night, just wanted to be up and talk to somebody. And he started asking him questions about this young man's life. And he told him, how he was trying to make his way through college. And at the end of the ride, the fellow came up to him and gave him a very generous tip. $5. $5. This was back in the day when, money was pretty scarce. At the end of the summer, he had to make a decision, Alex's father. Am I going to go back to college and try to finish my senior year? I don't have enough resources. Or am I going to, take the money that I've earned this summer, buy a mule and try to help my family out as they continue to work as sharecroppers? He decided that his best option was to go back to school, even though it would mean great sacrifice. Alex Haley writes, he says, when my dad arrived on campus, the president called him into his office and showed him a letter that had just arrived in the mail that day. The elderly gentleman from the train, a man that he didn't even know what his name was, sent a check for $518. That was enough money to pay his tuition and his room and board for the entire year at Lane Institute. The kindness of an unknown friend made all the difference in his life. And then in my life, Alex Haley says, and now in the lives of my children beyond me. Everything helped our family succeed because of that simple act of kindness. Lord, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you thirsty? When did we see you alone and naked and sick and isolated? When you did it to the least of these, my sisters and brothers. Pablo Casals, at 95, the great cellist, used to practice 6 hours a day. 6 hours a day on the cello. At 95. Finally, someone asked him, Pablo, why do you practice and rehearse 6 hours a day at this age? My goodness. Don't you think he would have given it up long ago? He said, this was his response. I practice because I still think I'm making a bit of progress in life. You know, if you want to get a job done, you ask a busy person to do it because they know how to schedule and plan to get things taken care of. I'm asking you today, as busy people, to support our church, our current expense fund, the budget of the church, the ministry and the mission of Grace Church. I know you're busy. I know you've got demands on your life and on your resources and your time and your talent. The reward of good work is not retirement, friends. The reward of good work is the opportunity to do more good work in the name of Jesus Christ. Don't pray for smaller mountains. Pray for better ability to climb. Because the mountains that we face ought to be higher than we are. God sets a challenge before us as a congregation. The question we want to ask ourselves is, as we think about our future, as we think about our church, as we think about our ministry and its impact in this community and beyond the walls of this community, is there room for more? Not the question my grandma's asking me, can I stuff more food into you, you know? Can I fill you up more? We don't need to be filled up anymore. Is there room for more? Can we open the doors? Can we expand the mission of our church? Can we invite other people in so that they might know the love, the care, the grace of God in their own lives? Only you can answer that question if you respond to the gifts. You know, it goes back to that story from Africa, doesn't it? When the church acts like the church, it attracts people. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.